My parents gave my twin $85,000 to start a business, so I quietly became a millionaire and let them find out the hard way. I stood there, still as a statue, in the middle of the graduation crowd while cheers erupted around me. My classmates hugged their families, posed for photos, laughed through tears, while I clutched my diploma in one hand and stared at the screen of my phone in the other, rereading the same short message for the fifth time that hour. So proud of Sienna graduating. Can't wait to celebrate when you get home. That was it. No mention of me, no congratulations, no acknowledgement that I'd just finished 4 brutal years of studying, sleepless nights, and soul-grinding projects to earn my degree in software engineering. Just another reminder that, as always, I was the twin who didn't matter. They were in Phoenix right now, sipping champagne and taking pictures under gold balloons that spelled out, "Congrats, Sienna," clapping for her graduation from a flashy but average business school. Meanwhile, I was here in North Carolina, alone, silently swallowing the lump in my throat as my classmates disappeared in groups of 2, 4, 6, with family, with love. The train station wasn't far from campus, and I dragged my suitcase there like it was filled with disappointment instead of clothes, not even bothering to take one last look at the college that had become more of a home than the house I grew up in ever was. As I sat by the train window, the city blurred into green fields and dull stretches of highway. It felt symbolic, like the world was just a long ride I was meant to sit through quietly while Sienna basked in the spotlight. Even when we were kids, every holiday and birthday was about her. We were twins, born 10 minutes apart, but you'd never know it from the way we were treated. Sienna, with her blonde curls and sky-blue eyes, looked like she was cut from a movie scene. I was the dark-haired footnote that didn't quite fit. When I was 10, I asked Mom why the cake only ever said, "Happy birthday, Sienna," and she just laughed, saying everyone knew it was my birthday too, as if that should have been enough for me. Spoiler, it wasn't. When we turned 16, she got a compact silver car with a red bow on top, and I got a second-hand laptop that Dad openly admitted was bought on clearance. Not that I resented the laptop. I loved that thing. I used it to code simple games, to join online forums, to apply to every internship and hackathon I could find. That laptop was the one good thing they gave me without realizing it, because it led me to Mr. Jensen, my high school coding club advisor, who once told me, "Cassie, you think in logic and layers. Other people don't. That's a gift." He was the first adult who looked at me like I mattered, and I clung to his words like a lifeline. By senior year of high school, while Sienna was busy planning her prom outfit and making TikToks in her room, I was perfecting my MIT application, building a portfolio so clean and functional it practically wrote its own recommendation letter. The night I got in, I told my parents over dinner, interrupting their conversation about Sienna's latest group project. Dad had just started saying they'd have to talk about college savings and how they'd only been able to put away enough for one of us. I got a full ride to MIT. I told them, barely able to keep my voice steady. The silence that followed was deafening. "You applied to MIT?" Mom asked like I'd just told her I was moving to the moon. "Since when?" "Since months ago," I said. Since I'd been working late at the school library while she helped Sienna prep for pageant auditions. I told them Mr. Jensen helped me, that I'd built my portfolio from scratch, that I didn't need a single dollar from them to attend one of the best tech programs in the country. They blinked like they'd never seen me before. Now, years later, I was returning home not to be celebrated, but to be invisible again. The train pulled into the station around noon, the air hot and flat as I stepped out, dragging my bag across the cracked pavement. No one was waiting for me. I hailed a cab, gave the driver the address, and leaned back against the worn seat, watching as the town I grew up in slowly consumed me like it always had. I reached the front door and hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The smell of party food and perfume hit me immediately. Laughter echoed from the living room, and a banner in pink and gold letters screamed, "Congratulations, graduate," as if Sienna had just cured cancer. Mom was laying out tiny sandwiches shaped like stars and didn't even look up when she said, "Oh, Cassie, you're here. Could you help me fold these napkins?" No hug. No "how was your trip?" No congratulations. Just more prep for Sienna's big day. I did as I was told, folding napkins into neat triangles while the doorbell rang and guests streamed in, each one bringing cards and gift bags wrapped in foil, all for Sienna. I stood off to the side like furniture, smiling politely when introduced and nodding like a bobblehead. The only person who even acknowledged me was Aunt Cheryl, who gave me a long hug and said, "I'm sorry we couldn't make it to your ceremony, sweetheart." "How was it?" "It was fine," I said, and meant it wasn't. Cheryl glanced around the room and frowned. "Are we not celebrating both of you today?" she asked, loud enough that several conversations around us faltered. Mom flushed. Of course we're celebrating both of them," she said too quickly. "Cassie just got here, so we haven't had a chance to, set up her part." I looked around. No signs of my name. No photos of me in a cap and gown. No acknowledgement that I had achieved something massive. "You mean like putting my name on literally anything?" I said, keeping my voice calm even though my heart pounded. Dad cleared his throat like a nervous sitcom character. "Dinner's ready. Let's all sit down." At the table, I ended up between my cousin Leo and some girl Sienna used to do cheerleading with, who couldn't remember meeting me before. Dad stood, holding up a glass. "I'd like to toast to our incredible daughters." I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they would finally see me. "To Sienna," he continued, turning to her with pride. "Your mother and I couldn't be more thrilled by your graduation and all the amazing things you'll do in business." Sienna beamed. "And we have a gift for you," Mom said, handing her an envelope. "To help you get started." Inside the envelope, a check for $85,000. I almost laughed. Sienna burst into tears, hugging both of them. "Thank you. Thank you so much. This means everything." Everyone clapped. And then, almost as an afterthought, Dad turned to me. "And to Cassie, for finishing her, computer studies. We got you something helpful too." He passed me a wrapped package. Inside was a book, How to Become a Millionaire, a step-by-step guide. "We thought this would inspire you," Mom said, beaming. "It's got great reviews." Sienna laughed, then covered it with a cough. "I'm sure Cassie will be rich one day too," she said, patting my arm like I was a toddler. "And when I make my first million, I'll give you advice." I held the book in my hands, trying not to react. If they only knew. If they had ever cared enough to ask, they might have discovered that I had already made more than they'd saved their entire lives. But they didn't. So I just nodded and said, "Thanks," pretending I hadn't just been erased from my own story again. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by walls covered in old posters of robotics conferences and science fiction movies, the same ones I'd stared at while my sister partied downstairs with her loud friends. The bed creaked in that familiar way it always had, the mattress too soft, the air thick with the scent of dust and forgotten ambition. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the dinner over and over in my mind like a broken record I couldn't shut off. Sienna sobbing over that ridiculous check, our parents glowing with pride like they'd raised the next business mogul of America, and me sitting there like a ghost with a self-help book I didn't need. I kept asking myself why I even came home, as if some small part of me still hoped for acknowledgement, still wanted to be seen by people who had never truly seen me at all. When the house finally went quiet, I pulled out my laptop, the same one I'd bought years ago with leftover scholarship money and a campus bookstore discount, the same one I'd used to write the code that changed my life. The bank app loaded slowly, like it was resisting what I already knew was true. When the number appeared, 1.8 million, post-tax, I took a breath so deep it felt like my lungs were rebooting. I'd been staring at that number for months, but it never stopped feeling unreal, like a secret I had no one trustworthy enough to share with. I took a screenshot, printed it using the dusty old printer at the bottom of the closet, and slid the page into the self-help book. It was a quiet kind of rebellion, but it was mine. By the next morning, my decision was carved in stone. I didn't come home to seek approval anymore. I came to end the performance I'd been forced to put on my whole life. At breakfast, Sienna was already going on about office spaces she wanted to lease downtown, how her friend's dad knew someone who could get her a meeting with an investor. "You need something upscale," she was saying, spreading jam onto a croissant like she was already a CEO. Clients need to be impressed the second they walk in. I poured myself coffee and let the warmth settle in my chest, matching the flicker of satisfaction building behind my ribs. Actually, I said, placing the book on the table with deliberate calmness, I wanted to say thanks again for the gift. There's something inside you might want to see. My dad picked up the book, his brow furrowing as the printed screenshot fluttered onto the table like a trap snapping shut. My mom leaned in, squinting at the bold numbers. Sienna leaned so far she nearly spilled her drink. "What is this?" Dad asked, his voice thin, brittle. "That's my bank account," I answered, casually sipping my coffee. "I sold the app one was building with Grayson last year. The deal closed a few months ago." The silence that followed was heavy enough to break bones. 1.8 million? Sienna nearly shrieked, her eyes darting between the paper and my face like I'd pulled off some elaborate prank. "This is real. Very real," I said. "And that's after taxes." My mother's hand clutched her necklace like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "You never told us," she whispered, as if I'd betrayed them by keeping this to myself. "You never asked," I said, not even bothering to sugarcoat it anymore. "You've known every detail of Sienna's life since birth, but you never once asked what I was working on." My dad tried to recover, clearing his throat. "We're very proud of you, of course," he said, the words stiff and unfamiliar on his tongue. "This is impressive. Are you proud of me?" I asked, not hiding the sharpness in my voice. "Or are you proud of what I can afford now?" That's when Sienna's expression shifted into something I knew too well, calculation. "That's amazing, Cass," she said sweetly, her voice thick with artificial warmth. "We should totally celebrate your success too. I mean, I always knew you'd do something cool with computers." My mother reached across the table and placed a hand on mine. "Sweetheart, we really are proud. We just didn't realize," she trailed off, her eyes still locked on the paper. I stood up before the scene could twist into something more theatrical. "I need to go. My train leaves in an hour." My dad stood too, trying to recover control. "We'll drive you," he offered. "It's the least we can do." "Already called a car," I replied, walking to the door. Sienna followed me, her tone dropping the moment we were alone. "You can't just drop a bomb like that and leave," she hissed, stepping in front of me. "You know Mom and Dad took out loans for my startup. They're counting on me to succeed. You're just going to let them drown while you swim in cash." I blinked, stunned by the audacity. "I didn't know that," I admitted. "But that's not my fault. That was their decision." She crossed her arms. "We're family, Cassie. You have money. Doesn't that mean you should help?" Before I could respond, the car horn sounded outside. "I'll be in touch," I said, stepping around her. "When I'm ready." The ride back to Burlington felt like air returning to my lungs. I watched the scenery pass like it was a life I was finally letting go of. There were no tears, no second-guessing, just the quiet comfort of truth finally being spoken. When I met the real estate agent at the apartment I'd picked out months earlier, I knew instantly I'd made the right choice. It had clean lines, a view of the mountains, fast internet, and most importantly, silence. "Congratulations, Ms. Hart," the agent said, handing me the keys. "It's all yours." That night in the hotel, I turned off my phone. 27 missed calls. Dozens of texts. I read none of them. Not yet. Instead, I made a list of things I needed for my new life. Desk, chair, coffee machine, blackout curtains, and maybe a plant to remind me I could nurture something. The next morning, I walked the quiet streets of Burlington with a calm I'd never known. No one here knew my sister's name. No one here remembered which twin was the favorite. All they'd ever know was me. Just Cassie, the girl who wrote code so clean it changed her life. And for once, I didn't need anyone else's permission to be proud of that. The first week in my new apartment felt like I'd been airlifted into someone else's story, someone with agency, someone who had space that actually belonged to them, and not just borrowed corners in a house where their presence was optional. I slept with the windows open despite the autumn chill, just to prove to myself that there wasn't a single voice nearby telling me what to do or how to feel or who to be. I furnished the place slowly, with purpose, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because every item I brought in felt like a claim to my own life. A sleek standing desk, ergonomic chair, a soft gray couch I picked after sitting on 6 different ones, and a rug with just enough color to remind me that silence didn't mean emptiness. Starting at North Star Systems was everything I had imagined during those sleepless coding nights in college when I believed success might feel like this. A team that respected me, a boss who actually read my resume, and projects that challenged my brain instead of draining my energy. By the second week, I'd already been asked to lead development on a new product interface, and instead of second-guessing every line of code I wrote, I found myself moving through my work like someone who knew they belonged. During lunch breaks, I slowly built real friendships with my teammates, people who didn't care who my sister was or how my parents ranked us. Zoe was the first to invite me out, a quiet, sarcastic product designer who somehow knew exactly when to offer a smile and when to just sit in silence. We ordered greasy noodles, watched trashy dating shows, and didn't once mention families. The peace didn't last long, of course. It never does when people think they're owed something. Aunt Cheryl called first, her voice low and matter-of-fact. Your parents are telling everyone you hit it rich and are refusing to help family, she said without preamble, like she was delivering an invoice and not gossip. I let out a quiet laugh and asked if they mentioned the part where they forgot I graduated at all. I'm just letting you know what's being said, she added. You have every right to stay quiet. But you should know Sienna's startup isn't doing well. She's already burned through half the loan, and small businesses don't want to pay premium prices for marketing fluff they can do themselves. I thanked her for the heads up and told her I appreciated that she'd always treated me like I wasn't invisible. We talked for another hour. Not about money, not about family drama, but about my job, my new apartment, and how I was thinking about getting a dog. When we hung up, I felt lighter, not because anything had changed with my family, but because for the first time, someone related to me saw me as a person and not a wallet or a shadow. The texts from my parents kept coming, rotating between casual check-ins and heavily veiled guilt trips. Hope you're settling in would be followed the next day by, don't forget family helped you get where you are. They didn't, and they knew it, but rewriting history seemed easier for them than owning the truth. I didn't reply, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I'd spent too many years trying to be heard by people who only listened when it benefited them. The silence was my boundary, and I guarded it like a fortress. Sienna finally reached out herself, first with a text that just said, "Hey, can we talk?" Then with a longer one the next day, filled with childhood memories that didn't actually happen. She wrote about sleepovers we never had, inside jokes we never shared, moments that had been entirely hers, but now suddenly had room for me in the retelling. It was manipulative, but almost impressive in its boldness. I didn't reply to that either. Blocking her felt dramatic, but necessary. I told myself it wasn't forever, just until I could trust that talking to her wouldn't make me question my own memories. 4 months into the job, I got my first quarterly bonus. It wasn't massive, but it felt earned, not gifted. I used part of it to upgrade my workstation and bought a record player because Zoe convinced me that jazz sounded better on vinyl. My Friday nights changed too. Instead of sitting alone with my laptop, I had people over, game nights, movie marathons, and once, even karaoke. They called me the Quiet Powerhouse, a nickname that felt absurd and perfect at the same time. Then, out of nowhere, my mom called again, and I answered before I could talk myself out of it. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice surprisingly subdued. "How are you doing?" I told her I was fine, which was true in the simplest sense. She hesitated, then said, "I'm not calling to pressure you. I just wanted to talk." My instincts screamed otherwise, but I let her speak. "Sienna's business shut down last week. The bank's involved now. Your dad and I are trying to manage the loan payments, but it's tight." She paused, clearly waiting for me to offer something. I didn't. "We're not asking for much," she finally said, "but we hoped you might consider helping. After all, we're family, and family supports each other." The irony made me blink, the way she emphasized support like it was something they'd ever extended toward me. "No," I said clearly. "I'm not giving you money to fix something I had nothing to do with." She sounded genuinely shocked. "After everything we've done for you?" I nearly laughed. "Like what exactly?" I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't list every birthday ignored or every achievement dismissed. I just said, I built my entire life without help from any of you. My scholarship paid for college. I worked through summers while you funded Sienna's extras. I coded my way into a company that respects me. I'm not selfish. I'm done being your backup plan. She stayed quiet for a long moment, then said, I hope you find your way back to your family someday. I hung up after that. The guilt hit later, not because I regretted what I said, but because I knew part of me still wanted their approval even after all this time. That part was quieter now, but it still existed, and I hated that it did. Over the next few days, the texts turned sharper. My dad sent long paragraphs about legacy and unity and rising together as a family, as if I owed them something just for surviving their neglect. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured myself deeper into work, finally started designing my own app in my spare time, and joined a local coding group where no one knew anything about Sienna, Marla, or Bruce. There were nights I'd lie in bed wondering how it would have felt if they'd just once told me they were proud without me having to prove it first. But those thoughts didn't stay long anymore. They were just echoes now, not anchors. I wasn't lost. I wasn't broken. I just wasn't theirs to define anymore. 9 months after everything fell apart at that ridiculous graduation dinner, my mother called again. But this time I answered without the usual spike of dread in my chest or the practiced excuses waiting on my tongue. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was just that enough time had passed, and I wanted to see if anything about her tone had changed. Her voice was quieter this time, like she'd rehearsed it carefully, softer around the edges, but still too familiar. Hi, Cassie, she said, with a kind of caution I didn't recognize from her. How are things? I told her they were good, which wasn't a lie in any shape or form. My work at North Star had gone from promising to exhilarating. I had just completed my first major project rollout, got singled out in a company-wide meeting for clean code and intuitive design, and I'd even been offered a mentor position for incoming developers. I had a circle now, people who didn't just like me but respected me, and every Friday night my apartment filled with laughter and gaming snacks, a far cry from the tense, performative dinners of my childhood. I had built something real, and not one piece of it was tied to my family name or their approval. She sighed into the phone like the weight of the silence between us had finally settled on her shoulders. I wanted to tell you something, she began, her words careful, measured like stepping over glass. Sienna's business has, well, it's gone. She officially closed it down last week. I said nothing. I'd already suspected as much from the lack of Instagram posts and the sudden halt of forced motivational quotes she used to flood her feed with. Mom continued, she's been applying for jobs, but nothing's stuck yet. Your father and I are still making payments on the loan, but it's been hard. I waited, knowing the real reason for the call was still coming. I'm not calling to ask for money, she said quickly, like she thought saying it fast enough might make it believable. I just wanted you to know that I've been thinking about how we've treated you, about how unfair it's all been. That was the first time I'd heard anything remotely resembling an admission, and it didn't feel like a victory. It felt strange, almost disorienting, like someone changing the ending to a book you'd already finished. We didn't see what you were building, and when you finally showed us, I think we were so shocked, we didn't know how to respond. You didn't want to see it, I said, and my voice didn't even shake. You were too focused on making Sienna the star of a show none of us asked to be in. She didn't argue. She didn't redirect. For once, she just listened. You're right, she said, and I blinked because I honestly hadn't expected her to say it. It shouldn't have taken $2 million for us to recognize your value. That's on us. I didn't know what to say to that. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I wasn't looking to start over. But it meant something, hearing those words spoken without a trace of manipulation. Thank you for saying that. I finally replied, not because it made anything okay, but because it was the first genuine thing I'd heard from her in years. She asked if maybe they could visit sometime, just to see the apartment, to talk without pressure or expectations. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. I just said, maybe. Not yet. We ended the call on neutral terms, and I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the skyline outside my window, trying to figure out what it meant to be the one holding the power now, the one who got to decide the terms. I wasn't used to being the center of the story, but I was starting to understand how it felt. A few days later, Zoe and I walked to our favorite diner for late-night fries after another Friday game night. She asked me what was going on, and I told her everything. About the call, the apology, the awkward truth that I didn't know if I could ever trust them again. She nodded, not offering cliches or useless advice, just saying, "It's okay not to rush forgiveness. You earned your peace. Keep it as long as you need." The next morning, I got a message from Sienna. It was the first one in months that wasn't drenched in fake sentimentality or guilt. Just a short paragraph about how she knew I had no reason to care what happened to her, but that she was sorry for acting like my success was something she needed to compete with. I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because some things are better left unanswered until the silence speaks loud enough on its own. Work got even busier in the following weeks, and I threw myself into it fully. I was finally trusted with higher-level architecture work and began shadowing the senior development team, something I hadn't even dared hope for in my first year. I finally signed up to give a presentation at a local tech meetup. Nothing huge, just a small talk on secure file-sharing protocols, but enough to push me past that invisible threshold I'd always hovered behind. People came up afterward, asking questions, taking notes, and I felt something in me settle that I didn't even know had been restless. Aunt Cheryl visited the next weekend, and we spent the entire afternoon drinking coffee and talking about everything from machine learning ethics to what kind of dog I should eventually adopt. Not once did she mention my family's financial drama or ask about the money. She just looked around my space and said, "This feels like you," which somehow meant more than anything else I'd heard in months. That night, I thought about what it meant to redefine family. That maybe it wasn't about blood or shared history, but about the people who saw you clearly without needing an explanation, who clapped for your wins even if no one else was watching. And in that moment, surrounded by soft light and the quiet hum of the city, I realized I didn't need to perform anymore. I had finally stepped off the stage they built for Sienna and found a world that didn't require me to compete for space. I didn't know if I'd ever go back. Not really, not in the way they hoped. But I did know that the version of me who used to sit quietly in the corner while the spotlight spun elsewhere was gone. She'd built something better, something permanent, something no one could take away. It was almost a full year after that awkward, half-apologetic phone call from my mother when I finally decided to let them visit, not out of sentiment or hope for some miraculous transformation, but because I wanted to see for myself whether the people I had grown up with had truly changed or simply adapted their tactics. They arrived on a rainy Saturday morning, carrying a box of pastries from a cafe they assumed I liked, and wearing the strained politeness of people entering unfamiliar emotional territory. The last time they'd seen me, I had been a quiet girl with a graduation robe and a fake smile, standing behind a table where my sister collected envelopes like trophies. Now I met them at the door with steady eyes and no desire to make anyone feel comfortable just for the sake of keeping peace. They walked through my apartment like it was a museum tour, commenting on the furniture, the light, the space, all of it filled with words that tried to avoid saying the one thing they'd never said before, that they were stunned I'd built something so functional and beautiful on my own. My mother ran her hand along the edge of the desk in my home office and finally muttered, "This is a nice place, Cassie. Really impressive." I said thank you, offering nothing else, watching her eyes flick to the framed article on my wall, an industry piece highlighting the interface I'd helped design for Northstar's flagship product. My father glanced at it and nodded slowly, as if the proof of my competence needed to be spelled out for him in clean print and serif fonts. We sat awkwardly in my kitchen, sipping coffee and dancing around any real conversation for at least 20 minutes before the silence became unbearable. My mother finally broke it by blurting, "We really are proud of you, Cassie. I know it may not have seemed like it before, but we are." I looked at her for a long time, letting the weight of her words land without bouncing them back with sarcasm or a tired retort. "You didn't seem proud," I said quietly. "Not when I got into MIT. Not when I built the app. Not when I told you about the job." She nodded, her face clouded with the kind of regret that looks a lot like realization too late. "We didn't know how to celebrate what we didn't understand," she admitted, which was probably the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. Sienna didn't come with them. I hadn't asked why, and they hadn't volunteered the information. I assumed she was still piecing her life back together in whatever way made her feel important again. The last I heard from her had been a vague, emotionally neutral message that read more like an HR-approved apology than anything real. I hadn't responded, and I didn't plan to. Whatever bridge was left between us had been torched years ago, and I had no intention of pretending otherwise just because the fire had cooled. When my parents left that afternoon, they did so with more humility than they'd arrived with, though I still wasn't convinced it had penetrated deep enough to last. I stood in the doorway, watching their car pull away through the misty streets of Burlington, and didn't feel any urge to chase after them or wave goodbye. There was no grand reconciliation, no slow-motion hug in the rain, just the quiet sense that I had outgrown the need for their validation, and maybe, just maybe, they were starting to see that I was going to be fine without it. Work only got better. I presented at another tech meetup, then got invited to speak at a national conference in Chicago the following month. People started messaging me on LinkedIn, asking for advice, complimenting the simplicity of my code, saying they'd read the article and wanted to learn more about what I did. For the first time, I was shaping the narrative of who I was, and it had nothing to do with being the other twin or the overlooked daughter. It was just me, Cassie, building things that mattered and being recognized for it without having to raise my voice or fight for space in a room designed to ignore me. One night, while I was reviewing pull requests and listening to old vinyl jazz records Zoe had recommended, I got a message that stopped me cold. It was from Sienna. Just one line, sitting quietly on my screen. "I miss you." That was it. No apology this time. No story, no manipulation, just a raw sentence thrown into the void like a rope across a canyon she didn't know how to cross. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers hovering above the keyboard without moving. Then I closed the window. I didn't delete it, didn't respond, didn't allow myself the indulgence of rehashing a relationship I knew would only pull me back into old wounds dressed as new beginnings. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight pouring through the big windows in my bedroom, coffee brewing in the machine I'd bought with my first bonus, and the knowledge that I had another full day ahead of me filled with work that mattered, friends who saw me clearly, and a city that had nothing to do with who I used to be. I took my coffee out to the balcony, wrapped in a soft sweater, and watched the street below come alive with morning joggers and bakery deliveries. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Zoe, asking if I was coming to brunch with the team. I texted back, wouldn't miss it, and meant it in every way that counted. In that moment, sipping coffee and listening to the quiet hum of a city that felt like mine, I understood something I hadn't realized before. The most powerful thing I ever did wasn't building the app or earning the money or even walking away from my family's approval. It was choosing myself over and over, even when they didn't. It was staying soft in a world that tried to make me small. It was knowing my worth before anyone else did, and never asking for permission to believe in it. So no, I didn't burn the bridges behind me. I just built better ones ahead. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing after anyone. I was simply walking forward, toward whatever came next, entirely on my own terms.